Hello, everybody. Hey, how's it going? How is everybody doing today? It's Recotopia, episode 95. Our big recommend is the 1992 film Leap of Faith, starring Steve Martin and Deborah Winger. I'm joined by Aaron and Jeremy Scott.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
And I'm Chris Atkinson. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing today?
I'm doing great.
Doing fine. We just got a last-second phone call from a child during the 5-minute countdown to our live show about paying for auto repairs, and he had to have an answer now. So that's,
Again?
Always.
Okay.
Always.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, does anybody have any small recommends for us today?
I have one. I have a small recommend that came to me via many years of Chris making it a big recommend to me. And I recently saw Train to Busan. Holy shit. Holy shit. Again, I think there was something that in my head just thought, okay, train, zombies, that's probably going to be interesting whenever I get to it. But it's doing so much more than that, in that it becomes like it has moments where they're like a stealth video game, because these things don't see, they only hear. And so they distract them with audio. There's one part where they're crawling quietly on the baggage things above the zombies, down below them. They keep getting separated. There's fires. The train is moving. It's just an adrenaline shot to my brain. I loved everything about this movie. Apparently the sequel is no good. I've been warned by many people to just stop where I am right here.
Get off at this stop. Don't proceed further.
I've seen, at this point, we've all seen zombie stuff. So for somebody to be able to create a fresh scenario and bend tropes in a new way, it was just really refreshing. And I often thought of Snowpiercer while watching this. They came out like a year apart from one another, so I doubt there's any like inspired by either direction, but they both play with that stuck on a train conceit in really unexpected and fun ways. So I saw this on Showtime. It's also on Tubi, Peacock, Pluto, Amazon Freevee. In other words, everywhere. So you, like me, have dragged your feet and have not seen Train to Busan. Here I am now on the other side, on the finish line, going, "You can do it! What's Train to Busan?"
I also watched Train to Busan for the first time this week. In order to prep for since you had watched it, I wanted to do that. So I actually watched it last night, and it's great. It's so super entertaining. It's so fun. It is, Snowpiercer Z. The zombies are very World War Z type, fast acting. Like there's an amount of time that it takes to become a zombie, and then there's the slow march of the zombie. And this movie's like, I don't got time for either of those. Like, you get bit, you're a zombie, and then you can run, and it adds a lot of fun to this movie. I think the first 45 to 50 minutes of this movie are some of the best zombie setup I've ever seen in any movie ever. It gives you the rules of the world. It tells you where you are, and you know exactly what to expect. I think there's, I'll just say this, it would be very, very fun to send the rest of this movie, because there's some nonsense in the rest of this movie that it kind of falls into. But I think it kind of brings it back with a pretty poignant and well done ending. I think the ending is really good here. So that kind of brings it back into the great movie must watch category, after a little bit of tropiness that it falls into there for a bit. But yeah, it's good stuff. Sure.
Aaron, do you have a small recommend this week?
I do. I'm going to talk about Maestro this week. Now, this is
today.
Nice. Good timing.
Yeah.
So this is in theaters currently for a little run before it hits Netflix here in about a week. Well, actually, as you're listening to this, probably just a couple days before it will be on Netflix for you on the 20th. This movie, the main thing I want to say is if you can see it in a theater, especially maybe like a Dolby theater, something with really good Atmos sound, do it. The sound design in scoring in this movie is some of the best I've ever experienced in my life. I got a chance to see this in the Netflix show theater that has, you know, state-of-the-art Dolby Atmos sound, and it just blew my mind. There was one scene where I was weeping from the orchestration. Like it was like there's like part of it is I'm sure the characters and what I know about the characters, and I'm sure that's playing into it. But the emotion I'm feeling is the movie's orchestration just pulling me somewhere. It is an absolute showpiece of a movie. And in fact, I think that will be its detraction from some, is that it may feel a little artsy or a little high on its own supply, maybe. Bradley Cooper is clearly trying to be a legend director. He's not trying to be a run-of-the-mill director. He is making some choices here with the way he's shooting things, the way he's framing things, some of the metaphorical symbolism he's putting into his frames. But overall, it's just amazing performances, an amazing life story that I wasn't truly aware of. Some of the things it has to say about love and what that is and the different forms it can take are really, really interesting. And I think Bradley Cooper is going to be a talent to reckon with. He certainly wants to go big, and this is another sign of it.
A Star is Born was good. Like this feels like such a big swing for his second directorial effort.
Yeah.
So I will admit to being a little skeptical, and I also would say I want to ask you, because I have heard people say no going in that this is a lot more about their marriage than it is his conductorness, which I think is actually a good choice to take somebody who's known only for his music and show us something about him that we don't really know, because apparently it's a really complicated and touching relationship. But I also want to point out that I can't hear the word maestro without thinking about that Seinfeld episode. Being called maestro. So
to respond,
it worked for Tar. Why not Maestro? Right?
That's right. That's right. To respond to that, Jeremy, yes, that is a very accurate description of the movie. It is really about their relationship, their marriage, and at the end of the day, there will be a similar Hamilton thing that may be happening with some people. Like, who is the Hamilton we're talking about? Who is the maestro here we're talking about? That kind of thing is underneath there as well.
She's the maestro of his heart.
Possibly. And I cannot overstate how good Carey Mulligan is in this movie. She is astonishing, and that's saying something when Bradley Cooper is giving his career best performance too. It's just insane acting from both of them.
Does she let out an unexpected gasp at the end of the movie?
Yes. Listen, I'm not here to tell her story. I'll let Bradley Cooper do that.
I got you. I've been on a 6-month hiatus, and I come to you not recommending movies, but a YouTube channel that I have been absolutely just wearing out for the last month. I'm like, can't get enough of this type of stuff. Not for everybody, probably, but I've been watching this Mr. Ballin YouTube channel, and this guy tells these stories, and she's like, if you're a fan of the dark and mysterious told in story form, as he says at the beginning of every episode, then you come to the right place. And so a lot of these episodes focus on him talking about true crime stories, and he will tell the story in such a way that you're like, okay, what's going on here? What's going on here? And a lot of times you will be blindsided by characters that have come up in the story. They turn out to be secret killers, and they have motives that you didn't understand until the very end, and all this other stuff. And it is so good. I have just, like, there was a period of time there. I've gotten to the point now where I've watched nearly all of his videos. He sprung up 3 years ago, so I've nearly watched everything. So it kind of sucks that I can't binge as much anymore. But he's got a podcast too, and he's got other stories on that. So I've been listening to those as well. So that will be my filling in the gaps. But if you enjoy this type of stuff, I would strongly suggest that you go and give him a watch, because the way he tells the stories are great. And it's kind of fun watching him when he started 3 years ago. He's a good storyteller, but not like a great one. By now, when he just comes out with his new episode, he's absolutely fantastic at storytelling. So if you like true crime and you like stuff like that, there are moments. He has warnings on all of his podcasts about distressful content and anything like that, because he will tell you in detail. There's no pictures. You're not going to see pictures of horrible things, but one of the series he has on there is like 3 stories that have famous photos that have really like I guess like scary photos or like disturbing photos that are connected to them. And sometimes it's often like people who have taken an Instagram selfie or whatever 5 seconds before they've died, things like that. But I highly recommend it. So that's my
Very interesting. You're the second person to recommend a YouTube channel to me today.
Oh, really?
Like the universe is telling me something. All right. Well, I believe that makes it time for this week's A Big Recommend.
Yes.
This week's Big Recommend is Steve Martin-led 1992 Leap of Faith. This is one of my very favorite movies, and I'm very excited to discuss it with you guys and with our chat. We open on what I think is a perfect opening scene for this movie, as the traveling tent revival ministry, Miracles and Wonders, I believe they're called, even though they don't really ever talk about that. Buses and trucks driving down the highway, and they get pulled over because they were speeding. And so Steve Martin, who is Jonas Nightingale, the pastor of this ministry, goes outside and not only talks his way out of the ticket, but ultimately gets the officer to make a donation to their ministry. And this scene tells us everything, man, about this group. It tells us the hierarchy, that Steve Martin is in control, that Jane, Deborah Wenger is basically his second in command, that none of them are really very religious, that Jonas is a master of reading people and reading situations, because he sees a lack of a wedding ring and a school banner in the window and deduces that this guy lost his wife and kid to divorce, sees a violin on the floor of the car and deduces that the kid played violin, and basically tugs on this guy's heartstrings. And I want to point out, when he goes back on the bus, they ask him how he knew about the violin, and he lies. He says, red mark from the chin rest. So again, we learn he doesn't even tell his own crew all of his own full cons and lies. And all of that will come back into play as we go further in the movie. Down the road a little bit, one of the buses starts to smoke, and the crew is forced to stop in an aptly named Rustwater, Kansas. I hope that's a real place, because that name is just awesome. Just imagine moving to a place and going, look how rusty this water is. We should just name our place for that. Rustwater is this tiny farming community in the midst of an extreme drought. And pretty quickly, Jonas decides to go ahead and set up the tent and do a revival there, since they have to wait 4 days for the part to come for their bus anyway. They need to eat. So they all go to a diner, and this is where we meet another key character, the waitress Marva. Marva's standoffish towards Jonas, which I would be too in her place. I think if I met Jonas in real life, I would be like, get the fuck away from me. But Jonas is drawn to her despite that. He grandstands in the diner and tells stories about a watch that he got from his lovely grandmother. And then he throws it and stomps on it. and declares, "Nothing has value without salvation." Just one of the many religious phrases he spouts throughout the film. And then we cut to him in the car digging through a bag of identical watches, where we see this is just a con that he does, where he pretends to destroy a beloved watch and just replaces it with another $10 cheap watch. They go to the sheriff, who's Liam Neeson, because they need permits, and he says no. Says the town's too broke, too unemployed, can't afford a revival right now. And Jonas does what he always does. He uses words and basically makes legal threats. Says he's got a team of lawyers in New York, yada, yada, yada. So the sheriff gives him the paperwork to fill out for the permit. And before we leave the scene, we see Jane, Deborah Winger, say, "Is all this really necessary?" And then in the very next scene, we find out that she basically flirted with him and got the permits outright, and they don't even have to fill out the paperwork. So then Jonas goes to the local radio station to promote the revival. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie because he starts off, "As I look out your window," and you see the old DJ look to his right because there's no window. He's just looking at a wall. And he basically promotes the revival. The old guy says, "You got 30 seconds left." And as a former DJ, I just want to point out that Jonas absolutely hits the post at the end of his little speech. And then we cut to my very favorite scene in the whole movie, which is the choir rehearsing a great gospel song and the tent being raised. And then we also have cuts of the crew going around town, passing out flyers. But I just love that song. I've been misunderstood. We see Jonas do a magic trick in front of a bunch of kids where he just throws something when no one's looking. But this is where we get our first glimpse of Boyd, who is Marva's younger brother who walks with arm braces. We also see Jonas sink a really long basketball shot after a bet he made with some teenagers to come to the revival. And I guarantee you those kids did not show up. Before the service, the sheriff sends every government inspector known to man to the revival to inspect, hoping to find something to shut them down. Jane flirts with him briefly again, even pretending that he runs over her foot, and then he cracks a smile. The sheriff is not as made of stone as he appeared to be. Back at the hotel, Jane and Jonas talk a little bit. We learn that she has hopes of maybe getting a Great Dane, and he says he can't take a dog on the road. And we learn that Jonas has failed to crack Marva's tough demeanor with more of his flirting. Then we finally get the first big revival scene of the movie. And this is probably the heart of the movie. As we see how this con is run, we see them eavesdropping on people as they come in and passing each other notes. We see Jane in the bus with video monitors everywhere and earpieces on everyone. We see a little old lady who is given the kindness of, "Let me put you in this wheelchair and wheel you on up front to the stage so that later on when she's wheeled up on the stage and pulled out of the wheelchair, it'll look like she's walking and been healed." This is just a con all the way through. Nobody here has any heart except for Jane, whose heart is really, really covered up right now. And part of the movie, maybe the point of the movie, is her journey to kind of rediscover that. Let's see. Then Jonas goes to work preaching. And you might be tempted to think that this is way over the top. It's not. It's only a wee bit over the top.
I think it's completely authentic and exactly how a lot of these services go. Like, yeah. I was shocked at how authentic it felt.
Yeah, when he does the healing, especially, you can go on YouTube and find real televangelists doing the exact kind of stuff that he's doing on here. But it's basically a Broadway show, and he even will later compare it to a Broadway show. But we get to see as the audience that there's not any sincerity on the part of the people putting on the show. Maybe some of the choir. I think maybe some of the choirs like really praising God with their voices. And it does seem occasionally like they don't know all of the cons that are happening. But it's not really going very well. Jane says on the radio that the crowd isn't feeling it. Guess we're going to eat burgers tonight. But Jonas, well, we already learned he thrives on a challenge. So he starts using the information the crew eavesdropped earlier and starts goosing the crowd into believing you've got a problem with your neighbor building a fence. Forgive him. And the service seems to go pretty well after that, but they still only make about $4,000. We've learned earlier that they need $3,500 a day to basically break even. So Jonas gives Jane a dog the next day. I think Jonas and Jane's relationship is fascinating, and I think a lesser movie would have delved straight into they used to date. And this movie doesn't do that. When Jonas feels jealous of her spending time with the sheriff, it's because he feels like she's cheating on the con, not on him. But I think that's a fascinating relationship, Jonas and Jane. I would love to see a prequel about how they came to be in each other's lives, because I feel like that relationship is old and long and weathered. So then Jonas goes to the diner, and this is where he sits down with Boyd, Marva's brother, and plays chess with him. You can tell that Marva's uncomfortable with him spending time with her brother. She goes outside to have a cigarette. And then when the chess game is over, he goes outside, and this is where we learn her reason for being standoffish with him is that her brother was told by previous faith people that he wasn't healed from his disability because he wasn't he didn't have enough faith, and he had been hit by a drunk driver, but the reason he couldn't walk again was that he didn't have enough faith, and it's kind of heartbreaking. I realize, and you regular listeners probably have already pegged this, that part of what draws me to this movie is the amount of time I have spent in worlds tangentially related to this world, and in having known people who have been told, well, this didn't go your way because you didn't have enough faith. So it really hits me in the gut when he says that. But then later he goes running, runs into Boyd again, and I think in that moment is trying to do the noble thing and tells Boyd, no one up there is going to save you. No one, that guy up there is not going to heal you. You're going to have to do that yourself. And I think it's his interest in Marva that is kind of revealing his humanity here in how he's treating Boyd, because he's not really trying to con the kid. At the service that evening, the sheriff interrupts and tells everyone about Jonas's true criminal past. Dump, bump, bah. What a dick this sheriff is, even though he's doing the right thing. But it backfires spectacularly because Jonas just spins himself as another sinner saved by Jesus. And it's actually another sight to behold. That night, we see Jonas sneak into the tent. We don't see him do it, but we know that he causes the statue to cry. And then the next morning, he's awoken by his employees, and all the people and the media are there. I want to know who went into the tent at 8 a.m. and climbed up a ladder and said, that statue's crying. But at any rate, somebody did, figured it out. It's a media sensation. Jonas comes in, acts like he didn't do it, climbs up the ladder, comes back down, and declares, hallelujah, it's a miracle. The music kicks up, and now people are going to come from all over to the next service because true miracles are happening here, correct? This brings people from all over the state, and as the cars line up filling into town, there's a disturbing amount of child labor going on, with kids selling drinks and running around handing cash to drivers and taking cash from people, and I'm just very surprised no one died in that scene. Jane and Jonas have a small tiff, and she goes to the sheriff's for a butterfly encounter. Actually, she just goes to talk, probably, and the butterfly encounter was like a bonus. But I would admit, I think anyone would be put into a romantic state of mind if someone next to you clapped and thousands of butterflies started landing on you and flying all over the place. It's pretty magical. That night's service, though, brings what I think is inevitable. Boyd comes and wants to be healed by Jonas. Jonas, when he sees him, he tries to wrap the service up like a coward. But Boyd holds his ground, and even after Jonas has left and gone back to the bus, the crowd is chanting one more, like one more miracle, one more healing. Never been in a church service like that where a preacher got an encore. Never seen that. but it's probably happened. So he comes back out, and then he starts the spiel. We can only do healings if everybody in this room has enough faith. And we've got the sheriff in this room, and we know he's a skeptic. So I just want everybody to, be cautious here that this might not. And as he's talking, Boyd behind him walks up to the statue of Jesus and touches it with both hands and then stumbles. And the whole crowd gasps, and Jonas even starts in on Will, the sheriff, saying, this boy's healing has been interrupted by a skeptic. But then Boyd actually tries again and starts walking without his arm braces. And everyone is wowed. It's a miracle of all miracles, except Jonas, who knows he didn't have anything to do with this. And he is initially adamant that he's been conned by this kid and his sister. And he and Jane have a huge argument where basically she says, you don't care about anyone, do you? And he says, I never pretended I did. And she's like, you're right. You didn't. And she basically walks off. And that's, I think, symbolic of her quitting or at least ending their relationship in a significant way. Jonas goes into the tent and drunkenly starts taunting the Jesus statue and starts doing what I call reverse preaching. Where he's saying what he thinks are bitter truths by twisting scripture that he has quoted before. But then Boyd is there and shows up, and Boyd wants to join the ministry. He's been healed, he believes now. But Jonas tells him the truth again, that he is a fraud. He says, I'm a fraud. And in a callback to earlier, because earlier in the movie, the kid said, my sister says you're a fraud. And he says, well, if I get the job done, what does it matter? And so the Boyd throws that back in his face. So if you are a fraud, if you get the job done, what does it matter? And I think that's fascinating because there's a piece of scripture, I'm pretty sure it was Paul, when he's asked about false prophets. It might not be Paul, but he says, whether by false motives or true, Christ is preached. I don't know why that always stuck with me, but it did.
It always stuck with me because he ends it with, what do I care? Which sounds so modern. It's like, whether the motives are true or false, if Christ is preached, what do I care? All right.
So he agrees, Jonas agrees to let Boyd join the ministry and says, 10 o'clock tomorrow outside your sister's diner, I'll meet you. And then he leaves, and almost immediately he says to the sister, yeah, I'm not going to be there, but it's not because I don't care about him. Just make sure he knows that. Then we see Jane at the sheriff's house. It's obvious that they have done the deed.
Mm-hmm.
And
they did it.
There's some balcony cuddling. Then she goes to see Jonas in his hotel room, but finds the door open and the sparkly jacket there with a note for her. And we see Jonas hitchhiking, climbing into his semi-tractor trailer. Guy says he's on the way to Pensacola, Florida. And Jonas is leaving. Jonas is going to reinvent himself. He's probably done it a dozen times in his life. And then it starts to rain. And this town has been in drought. Buried the lead. This town has been in drought for months and months and months.
I think you said that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And so it starts to rain. And we see the town dancing in the rain and enjoying and cheering. And I'll have you know, that one rainstorm is not going to fix your drought, but I'm glad that you think it will.
Nope.
And then we see Jonas waving his hat out the window of the semi in the rain, saying, thank you, Jesus. And the movie ends. All right, guys, who wants to go first on your general thoughts about this film?
Chris, you're back. Give us some thoughts.
Yep. So what I do like about the movie is that it shows you how people who are susceptible to this kind of thing, why they would follow somebody like Jonas. A lot of times there are just a lot of people out there who are looking for answers to their problems. And when somebody comes out of the blue and starts talking about faith, which is something that for most small towns, you're going to have a bunch of people who are very attuned to that. They start talking about faith and they start having answers that they can't possibly have. How in the world are they getting these answers? Like, how do they know these things about me and everything? that is a very powerful draw for a lot of people. And so I really appreciated the sort of the what you can tell is the foundation for why a con man like Jonas can be so successful in a story like this. I had a problem with the movie because I didn't know what I was rooting for in this. Steve Martin comes in and he is taking advantage of a town that has very little money. They know this right off the bat. That usually I guess they do something that's a little bit higher class, usually is what I got the sense of. It seems like this is the exact crowd that they would have to go after, though, because a little higher bit of class may not fall for this type of thing. But I didn't know what we were rooting for, because there's nothing in Steve Martin's arc that says, boy, I hope he learns his lesson, or, you know, something like that. That's what I was like, what are we? And like, by the end, of course, the movie has to completely 180 him. And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter that he's a con man. These people believe so much in God and their faith and everything that it turns out that it's real. You know, this person can walk all of a sudden. The rain comes down, all this stuff. So it doesn't matter. The point is that he stirred them up enough to get to this point, and that's how the movie sort of goes. So I was hoping, because, you know, this movie, the Steve Martin con man thing, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels came out before this, and we are led to believe that the people that they are conning are corrupt people. You know, they're unknowingly corrupt in their ways, as he goes through the story. And so, like, we kind of are fine with them conning the rich people that are in that movie, because there's like some sort of, like, you know, we believe that they've done bad things or whatever. They don't deserve the money that they have. These people are very innocent people. And so I'm like, okay, what are we hoping for Steve Martin to do in this? Because one angle would be these people are corrupt, so we want them to get conned. The other thing is that Steve Martin is corrupt, but he's got a soft spot that we really hope that he finds by the end. But we don't know that soft spot until about 3/4 of the way of the movie, probably, where, you know, he's finally sort of getting in with the Lolita Davidovich character and Lucas Haas and all that. Like, you kind of see he's got a soft spot for them, but it doesn't feel like there's a natural change in his character that makes sense to me.
No.
And, so that's what I kept going through. I was like, I love the fact that it's got this foundation for how cons get perpetrated on people. But as far as the movie itself, I love Deborah Winger in this, by the way. I think she's probably the best part of this movie.
Yeah. She's the only one that really has an arc, I think.
Yeah.
Where she realizes how much this has, you know, hardened her heart, and desires to get away from it.
Yeah.
Aaron?
My general thoughts are, I really enjoyed watching this movie. I had already mentioned an experience where I'm just like, oh, this movie has clearly done its research on the Pentecostal church, on the idea of faith healers, on the idea of, you know, it's interesting. This kind of thing predates the idea of a mega church, but there's a lot of that. I don't know that it predates the idea of a megachurch, but more of the conglomeration of these megachurches. Like, but you get a lot of that sense of, you know, production is the key to reaching out to people. So I really resonated with a lot of the themes in the situations that were going on. I, like Chris, was very confused at times about what the movie was trying to do, what it was trying to say, where it was trying to go. I think there's nothing wrong with a movie that opens a lot of questions and then just leaves you to have discussions afterwards. That's fine. I don't mind that. In fact, that's one of my favorite things about a movie like this is I'm going to have discussions with people I watch it with about what is the movie trying to say? What's it trying to do? I just think that there's also something energizing about a movie that has a clarity of thought and a clarity of, you know, what it's trying to do. And I was I didn't see a lot of that here. I don't think this movie is interested in whether God exists at all. I don't think that's the point at all, which is interesting. I think this movie pretty firmly believes God exists. If you just read the text, like there's an idea of, and you can I didn't see a lot by this director Richard Pierce, but if you look at kind of his stuff after this, it's kind of family based, movies. So I think that the point here may have been to be like, if God exists, he ain't happy with this, like, which is fine. I think we all agree with that. But it's an interesting thing because I can't see someone who is an atheist walking away from this movie going, yeah, like there's not a lot of that kind of idea here. And I can't see someone who is a person of faith walking away from this movie going, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think atheists or Christians should use this movie as evidence.
Right.
Either way. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I'm finding myself really enjoying the performance. I think Steve Martin is perfect for this. The research I read said that Michael Keaton was the first choice for this performance.
Interesting.
Which is a totally different movie, by the way.
Yeah. He could have nailed it. He played on one episode of Frasier. He played a former associate of Frasier's who had conned Frasier a million times, and he shows back up in a wheelchair as a preacher and says he's been saved, and Frasier doesn't believe him. Frasier thinks it's a con, and everyone else thinks he's a changed man. And then Michael Keaton is preaching in the final scene of the show, and he's awesome. He's also conning. It turns out that Frasier but this hilarious scene when he's preaching and everybody's like, praise the Lord, and Frasier stands up and just starts baaing like a sheep at the people in the audience. He goes, bah! Awesome. I think Michael Keaton would have brought a lot more bite to this. A completely different performance, but I think he would have nailed it. But it feels like a script went through a few changes. And they knew they had to do something with Jonas at the end. It was not typical Jonas, but they also didn't feel like they could have him completely 180 and believe in miracles. So they had him shrug and laugh off at what might be a coincidence. I'm not sure, but I think that Deborah Winger character is what gives the movie at least some bit of a heartbeat, in that, she does have a changed perspective at the end from what she began the movie as. But you're right. I mean, it just kind of goes up to the end and they're like, wow, we don't really know how to end this. Yeah.
Can I tell you, right before I watched this, I watched Officer and a Gentleman for the first time.
Oh,
and
nice.
And that was not intentional. I did not realize Deborah Winger was the common denominator there until she popped up in Leap of Faith. And I was like, oh, I just fell in love with this woman. So it's nice to see her again. She's as cute and adorable as ever. And I did love her in Officer and a Gentleman. It's one of the only things I loved in that movie. In fact, I did not enjoy Officer and a Gentleman. Yeah. But anyways, I may have missed something, so I want you guys to help me out. The Jesus wept scene, I had a hard time understanding it. Did I miss a moment where we know for sure he did something to that statue, or someone did something to that statue?
He gathers a bunch of makeup and bottles and puts them in a bag and goes into the place and sees the sleeping security guard, and it cuts away. And so he absolutely did something.
But I missed that. I missed that foreshadowing.
I knew he had done something because of that scene. I had to figure out what he did, though, because I did not realize the Jesus's eyes weren't open.
That's what I thought. It was Jesus opened his eyes. I didn't think it was the crying. I kept
rewinding it, and I was like, what is going on here? And then he rubs the face. I don't see tears, and maybe it's due to the fact that it's worn out over the years, and maybe you don't see the water.
No, you guys are right. It's not tears. Yeah. I think he puts his thumb under the eye, and I think I have just always assumed, oh, it's crying. But you're right. The statue had closed eyes before,
and then it opened its eyes.
And then it confuses things even further, because the next scene is him throwing that shirt down in the tub, and he's like, turpentine. Well, that was worth it. It was that was a good shirt, but the trick was worth it, or whatever. And I was like, the turpentine and the shirt. What does that have to do with this?
Because he got paint on it. He got paint on it when he was doing
so I had to sit there and like rewind 100 times to go, okay, what was really going on?
You know, there is something to be said about what is a film's responsibility in allowing the audience to see the clues, find the clues. I'm fine taking the hit and just going, I missed it. Right? Mm-hmm. Because I actually would rather a movie be more subtle than more overt. So I'm glad we went through that, because you're right. There are absolutely indications and foreshadowing that this is what happened, and I just missed it. Because I missed it, I wondered if he didn't do it and he was trying to figure out what happened, but that is not the case. That is not what the movie is saying when I think about it. So,
I'll say another thing that's good about that scene before he goes to do the painting and everything is you get to see all the stuff that's in his box, and I'm assuming I kind of get a backstory here that he must have been with his mom or somebody was a traveling con person or whatever that was doing these kind of like, I can read your mind and everything. There's this like little flyer or something that pops out of that box where you see this little child and you see this woman, and they're obviously it's some sort of like, I can read your mind type of thing that they were going town to town doing and everything. I thought that was a really nice touch.
They even used the same technique from Nightmare Alley, where like certain words are cues from the hostess in the audience or what have you.
Oh yeah, it's really, you can tell someone did their research into magic tricks, how things, cold reads. The stuff he's doing with the officer in the first scene is classic cold read stuff.
Yep.
Like it's very, and even the clear the stuff you may have just mentioned this with the letters that the Deborah Winger character was choosing words that began with a certain letter that would clue him into what they had. Like all that stuff is really, as somebody who really enjoys Penn and Teller's Fool Us, all that stuff is common in a lot of, magicians' tricks, and to, use those to play on people's faith and their hope it's disgusting. And I think the movie does a good job at portraying how disgusting it is.
I want to also come to my own defense here about why I've seen this movie 6 times and I still thought it was tears because if the eyes were closed and then the statue's eyes opened, no one is going to say that's a miracle. That's not the miracles people report with Jesus statues. It's tears, right?
Or blood.
They would
Tears
go,
or blood. Yeah.
They would go, somebody painted over those eyes. That's obvious.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
If the statue was crying and secreting something, that is unexplainable.
I mean, he does rub the face like it's been crying. So I don't know, man.
Who knows? I'm just saying.
Is he wiping off a little extra paint that didn't dry or something?
I don't know. Maybe, but he does it in such a theatrical manner. I thought that it was not necessarily him covering up for a mistake. It was him being awed by what he saw.
Yeah.
It's weird. I do feel we're pointing it out, but I do feel like there's a lot on the cutting room floor of this movie that might have connected the dots a little better.
It does feel like a movie that is trying to find its meaning as opposed to had it and then presented it.
Yes. That is a very good way to put it.
It feels like it never quite coalesced and got to exactly what it wanted to see.
Biggest underuse of Philip Seymour Hoffman in history. Even though
it's funny. Like, how did this guy become such a tremendously huge actor when you look at stuff like this and Twister and all of that when he was back in these early 90s and everything, and suddenly people were like, well, maybe we should have him do more than just emote and yell to something off the screen, and it's like, maybe there's something better behind this guy, because if you watched those 2 movies, you would just think that's what his role was the rest of his life. Playing these characters,
So.
Bandana guy with long hair who quips.
All right, I have an important question.
Okay.
Is Liam Neeson miscast in this movie?
I think terribly miscast.
I just think there are so many different types of personalities that would have been much better and much more able to create that tete-a-tete thing that the movie I think wants than Liam Neeson. I think he's too laid back for this character.
Here's a question for you though. Are we saying that because most of us started to pay attention to Liam Neeson Schindler's List on, and he's played these different kinds of characters?
Yeah, it's impossible to know. Yeah.
And then, I mean, he'd been around forever before this. You know, there's all sorts of movies he was in like before this movie, even, and like Darkman and stuff like that. It was a big one for a lot of people as well. But like, I've thought of that myself. I do think it's weird seeing him in here playing this very calm character. But at the same time, I was like, is that because I know him because of Taken and all this other stuff that he's done recently? Is it coloring? I don't know.
I just feel like that, especially that, you know, break up the revival and you know, and tell everybody this person's past scene. The what he brings to that is very, very little. Like the natural presence he brings to that doesn't quite work with the energy of what I think that scene should be.
I get what you're saying, because he does seem out of place in this movie quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just the accent being in the you know Midwest.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I want your story. How did you get here? I want to know more of that.
Right. Yeah.
All right, I think one or both of you have prepared a super secret double feature for today. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I guess both of us have. I'm not sure, but the movie has already been mentioned, so it is not super secret. But Nightmare Alley is the movie that I thought of.
Nice.
During this, either one, you can pick the original or the new one with Bradley Cooper. But it goes with the same sort of deal, you know, someone who is using a lot of tricks to do the thing that they're doing that's wowing and amazing everybody. I think this would go along well with that. Also, South Park fans, there's an episode where they tear apart John Edwards, who used to have a show like that was a syndicated show where he did this kind of like thing where he would be like, I have a feeling that there's somebody who's got a person who's died recently or whatever. Yeah. And, you know, he'd do all these little tricks, and South Park set out to just basically just like point out point by point what John Edwards was doing all the way through it. And
that's amazing.
It's fantastic. It's one of the older South Park episodes. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely thought of Nightmare Alley, went down that route for a second. I thought of, you know, other Preacher movies. I thought of The Apostle for a little bit as an interesting double feature here. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, of course, would be an interesting double feature here with Steve Martin. But eventually, I landed on a more recent film, The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
Okay.
And I like these two back to back because there's an interesting thing that Leap of Faith doesn't present, which is that a lot of people who do this believe what they're doing. Yeah. We are in a situation in Leap of Faith where it is clear from the beginning he knows he's a charlatan. He knows that he is taking people for a ride. And there is a group of people who do this for money, and they convince themselves of all sorts of things because they believe, according to themselves, so deeply that the message has to get out there or whatever. And this movie deals with that through the eyes of, in very empathetic eyes, of a woman who really believes these things, but is trying to figure out her role in all of this production and in the move of the religious right to a political power and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I find it a very interesting double feature because it kind of goes, okay, here's the charlatan who knows he's a charlatan version, and then here's the somebody who is really struggling with their actual faith and how it relates to the production element and the money element. And Andrew Garfield is amazing in this movie as well. Yeah, Jessica Chastain is incredible in this film too. So yeah,
any excuse you have to go watch Jessica Chastain and/or Andrew Garfield is a good.
Agreed. Well, Chris, now that you are back, we're glad to have you. But you have the honors for next week to give us our homework.
And by the way, thanks everybody who have come into the chat and asked how glad that I'm back and everything like that. I'm happy to be back. I didn't want to make too big of a deal of that because it's just, I'm going to be doing my normal stuff here. And I didn't have like an epic 6 months or anything where I was like, I got to tell you, when I went backpacking in Europe and blah, blah,
Let me tell you what it's like to walk on the moon. It's just insane.
Yeah, I recommend it. Anyway,
my small recommend is the moon.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm coming back, and I was in the middle of doing comedies by the decade when I left, and I was in the 50s. So we will be going to the 60s, and I'm not treating you guys gently. With this one. This is a 3.5 hour movie, but it's a mad world is my big recommend for next week. If you're wondering why this movie has 3.5 hours on it, it's mainly because they tried to put almost every comedy star known at the time into this movie, and they're all getting their own like time to shine in it. So I think that was one of those things where they didn't want to waste the actors that they got, so they decided we'll go the other way and make this 3.5 hours long. But I don't know if this is the beginning. This is the first of its kind. It's basically it's like what would you call it? It's one of those movies where everybody's going after a certain something and they have to go across the country to get it and everything. It's one of those what is I can't even think of the game that you play. It's
Amazing Race. I don't know.
It's kind of an Amazing Race. But did you ever see that movie Midnight Madness that came out in the 80s? It was like Michael J. Fox and everything. Yeah. I can't. And Rat Race, which came out. It's it's that type of thing. Just a million people going after one thing and interpreting clues in a certain way and whatever. So this is just one of those. By the title, it's a very nutty movie with tons of comedic stars from like all the decades are in this. Like I think Charlie Chaplin's in this movie, and Buster Keaton for sure is in this movie. I don't know if Charlie Chaplin made it in this, but it goes back decades how many comedy stars are in this thing. So anyway, that's the big recommend. So
mad world. All right, this is folks playing along at home on Tubi and Pluto TV and the Roku channel for free. It's on MGM Plus with a subscription, or you can rent it from your favorite streaming service. It's a mad world, man. I think that's probably good on time for today, man. If you want to wrap us up.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Thank you again, chat. It's good to be back. Thank you for coming in and giving us your thoughts. Maybe with this 3-man booth, we'll have a chance of doing questions at some point. From what I understand, you guys have not been getting questions much anyway, right?
We have not been, no.
So,
sorry,
anyway.
I talk a lot. What can I say?
Yeah. Maybe we will gag Aaron Dicer on one of the next.
It's going to have to happen at some point.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much, chat, for coming out and everything. But that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you next week.
Bye.